So welcome back to the first case for this week of Fair Friday. So in our first case for this week, we are going to Utah, specifically Salt Lake City. Of course, this will be my first video out of Utah, unless I've done another one and I just don't remember, but I'm pretty sure this is my first one. So we're going to Utah for this one. And just a heads up, even though this is a female murder channel, we have to talk about the husband of our killer before we bring in her, because not only was he born before her, but there's more information out about him than there is her, so there you go. So that being said, we're just gonna jump right into it. But if
I lay down and I play dead and I stay dead, maybe you'll get sick of being the monster out of my head, under my bed. Think you're something out of my nightmares, standing right there. But if I lay down and I play dead and I stay dead, then will you get bored of killing me?
So Charles Bruce Longo was born November 4th, 1938 in Yonkers, New York State. His mother stayed at home, so stay-at-home mom, and his dad was a doctor, and apparently he thought he was better than most people because, you know, dad's a doctor, and back then doctors were making good money. He would graduate high school in 1965, and then he joined the Marines, and here is where he is introduced to the Mormon faith, and then he gets baptized under the Mormon faith 2 years later, so 1967. And 57, sorry. And then 1960, he is sent on a mission trip, which apparently that's the thing you do, like after between like 18 and 24, and apparently like you pay for it yourself, and you go to Uruguay for like 2 years, basically to like spread the word, you know. So then he's supposed to be there for 2 years, but apparently he gets sent back early due to apparently hearing voices. He had also contacted hepatitis during this time, and so he goes back to Yonkers to get treated for the hepatitis. So then in 1961, he would be attending Brigham Young University, which is where apparently if you're Mormon and you want to go to university, apparently that's the university you go to, because it's in Utah and that's where most of Mormons apparently hang out at. And apparently he had majored in Spanish and minored in political science. So then while at Brigham Young University, he would meet his wife, Margaret Erickson. And so Margaret Erickson, she was born November 4th, 1939 in Sweden. She converted to Mormonism when she was 18, so then, of course, she would start attending Brigham Young University. And this is where, of course, the two meet. In December of that year, they get married, like Bruce and Margaret get married after literally meeting each other like early that same year. And apparently he'd even told like a friend of Margaret's that like he was going to marry her, so of course she's flattered. And so they get married pretty quickly. Bruce apparently graduated from university, whereas Margaret had apparently dropped out. And so he graduated in 1965. By then, they had like 3 kids. They had apparently a son and 2 daughters by then. So then, of course, he would meet and preach to 3 friends, Sterling Peacock, Gil, and Paul Shipman. And so at this point, this is where Bruce, Charles, whatever you want to call him, he starts going off the rails, because he starts saying that he is a descendant of David from the Bible. He legally has his last name changed to David. So he's no longer Charles Bruce Longo. He now goes by the name Emmanuel David. So then he started saying like the Star of Judaism should be associated with Judaism, and that him and his followers, they're the true Israelites, not the Jews. So then on top of that, he tried to claim that he was God and that he would fill in the next spot for the leader of the Mormon Church, since the current member, not current as of right now, but current at the time, because it was like the late 60s, David O. McKay apparently had just died, so obviously they needed a new leader. So that he tried to say, oh, I'm the new leader, except he was excommunicated in June of 1969, and they put Joseph Fielding Smith, and apparently that caused him to be like very depressed. And he decided to just like quit the Mormon faith altogether. So then, of course, obviously his followers were kicked out too, since they believed the same thing like he did. And then they all moved to Manti, Utah. So then Margaret, his wife, she starts going by Rachel David, even though most sources I saw, she was referred to as Rebecca. But what is known as, she changed the last name David like her husband did. Sterling, Paul, and Chip, they're all going by last name David now. And they all took first names of people in the Bible. So apparently Sterling is now Matthias David. Gil is now Jonathan. And Paul took Peter. Which Paul is the name of the Bible, but I guess like they didn't want Paul, they just decided Peter was a better fit. So in 1974, Matthias and Jonathan moved to Spokane, Washington. They started a karate studio, and pretty much all the profits were sent back to Emmanuel and his family. By this point, Matthias and Jonathan had families of their own, but they were like, look, it's a priority to feed Emmanuel and his kids. And by this point, Emmanuel and Rebecca, Rachel, whatever she preferred to be called, they had like 7 kids by this point. And of course, you can imagine they also had Bible names as well. And so in order, we have Rachel, Elizabeth, Joshua, Deborah, Joseph, David, and Rebecca. Now, I am going to show a picture of the children, but I don't know like who specifically is who. So before anyone says anything, like, look. So between June of 1975 and to February of 1976, they are staying in a motel in Malusica. And so as you can imagine, they were never like put into the public school system. So the government pretty much didn't even know these kids even existed. Remember, these are like 7 kids. So they were taught like reading, math, art, and like Bible study. Because of course you gotta have that Bible study. And then they were never allowed to use a swimming pool because apparently it said that Satan has like a strong influence with water. So obviously, like y'all can't use a swimming pool for that reason. So then Emmanuel will start believing that his 3 friends, Matthias, Jonathan, and Peter, they're now archangels instead of like just regular people in the Bible. He tells them to move to Washington, D.C. because the government's about to collapse and I need you to move to Washington, D.C. to prepare your way for the collapse so that way you're not as affected as you would be if you were in Spokane. So, of course, they sell the studio because they listen to their leader. They're doing what he tells them to do. So then, of course, they sell the studio, go to Washington, D.C. But, of course, you know, Washington, D.C. even back then was expensive because it's the capital of the country. So, you know, it's going to be expensive. And they become homeless pretty quickly. But, of course, any money they get, they still send it back to Emmanuel because, you know, that's how faithful they are to the religion that they have. So then Emmanuel has the family apparently just up and move without even paying the bill. The bill apparently was like $6,000. And I guess he just was like, I don't know if that's the entire period that he was staying there or like he started paying at first, but then I was like, well, add it up and I'll pay it in a month or something. And he straight up never paid. It didn't say what happened to those funds, who had to pay him. Didn't say it either. So then they moved to Salt Lake City, remember, in Utah, and where our story takes place, and they get into another motel, obviously. Well, he contacts Matthias and Jonathan and tells them, hey, you know the golden plates that the Book of Mormon was written off of? Yeah, I got those plates. So then, of course, them being from the Mormon faith, they obviously know about it, and pretty much knows this man named Joseph Smith who was alive in the 1800s, and apparently an angel came down, gave him these golden plates, and he wrote down what it says, and that's where the Book of Mormon came from. And apparently the angel took it right back to heaven, and that's why no other man has ever seen it before. So, of course, they're like, he has it? How's he have it? So, of course, they head up to Salt Lake, all the way from still Washington, D.C., to see, like, where the plates are. Of course, they don't see the plates, so, like, where are the plates? This man claims that he is the plate. So then, of course, Peter, which was Paul Chipman, real name, he leaves after this because he realizes it's some BS. And then he goes and works at a lumberyard. Apparently, he moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico, gets a motorcycle, and he pretty much opens like another karate studio. And at this point, it's pretty much believed that he pretty much just like left the cold because it took for Emmanuel to lie about some plates for him to open his eyes, like, okay, this is some BS. So at least someone left. So in 1977, the FBI actually starts investigating the David family because David wasn't working. Rachel, Rebecca, whatever the hell her name is, she ain't working. Ain't nobody in this family working, but they're getting all this money and they're able to afford these nice fancy meals and this good $90 a night hotel. So they end up, of course. So then they're looking to try to see if any frauds committed, try to see if this money was obtained while he was working. He's just living off that money until he gets a new job or something. So then, of course, the FBI finds out that the followers, so like Matthias and Jonathan, they're asking people from the Mormon church, like, hey, can you donate? Because there's this 9-year-old girl that has cancer. And obviously, you know, once you bring children cancer, a lot of people usually tend to, like, donate. Not knowing that it actually is going to go to David so he can help have his little luxury lifestyle. And so in May 1978, I guess it was proven that at least Matthias was considered, they at least had proved Matthias had committed wire fraud. So he gets sent to 5 years in federal prison for the wire fraud, for pretending to have like this sick daughter who had cancer to ask for the Mormon people, right? So then at this point, Emmanuel feels trapped. He's like, I know I can't get loose. So he borrows a friend's truck. And it says he borrows one of the 3 followers' trucks. He borrows one of their trucks on July 31st, 1978. So 2 months after Matthias is arrested. Well, I guess not arrested. Sent to the 5 years in federal prison. He drives off somewhere. He is found dead 2 days later, having committed suicide by carbon monoxide. There was no suicide note, and only $5 was found in his pocket. So then, of course, after they identified him somehow, Rachel, obviously being his wife, they're going to notify him, say, hey, I'm sorry, ma'am, your husband's deceased. So of course she's asking the hotel manager, like, how am I gonna rely without my husband? I got these 7 kids. And obviously, they pretty much heavily relied on him, like financially at least, because he was the male figure of the household. So, like I said, the next day they wake up. And remember, I don't know if I said this, they're at the International Dunes Hotel at the 11th floor. So they wake up the next day. I guess like she wakes up first, and she wakes up all her kids, according to accounts. So she wakes up all 7 kids, rounds them up. We going out to the balcony, and the older kids just start jumping off, apparently voluntarily. Sorry, Rachel, Elizabeth, and Joshua. So 15, 14. And 13, they all start jumping off, apparently, like, willingly on their own, like they weren't coerced or anything. So then, of course, the mom, she obviously had to throw the 4 younger kids off, because they actually weren't for throwing themselves off. I think, like, 12, 9, 8, and 6. Those were the ages of the kids that she had to throw off. So then, by the time she, what makes it so sad is that apparently the owner's wife has seen, like, the first couple kids, like, jump off, and they already knew about Emmanuel committing suicide. So then she ran into her husband, who apparently was working the front counter that day. It was around like 7 a.m. So this shit is like early as fuck in the morning. So you imagine if you see like a bunch of kids like jumping off the 11th floor, obviously people are gonna start gathering around and shit. And there are people that are shocked saying like don't. And there are people that pretty much collected pretty quickly that their mother was throwing them off. And that like this was pretty much murder because the mom's at least she threw off the younger kids, right? So then when it's her turn to jump off, the mom's turn, because all the kids that already like fell down. People are apparently there are very few reports that say this. I can't exactly verify, but apparently there was somebody that yelled "jump, bitch, jump," because at this point people were pretty much connected that she pretty much just killed pretty much all her kids. So then she's sitting on the railing for like 30 seconds, and then she jumps off, pretty much ending her life. Everybody dies except Rachel. Not Rachel the mom, but Rachel like the oldest daughter, the 15-year-old. So it wasn't like she survived for a little bit, then like died later. She did survive, and apparently is still alive today, but she has brain damage and is permanently paralyzed. Her surgery bill for about 10 hours of surgery was about $8,500 back then. Not $8,500 now, but like back then. It got so bad that the doctor didn't even want to give like an actual estimate, so the best he gave was like $8,500, which you know is bad. The doctors don't even want to give an estimate how much the surgery is going to cost. So then 1993, fast forward, she's an adult. She'll be an adult in 1993. She's living with her uncle, and apparently she goes and does an interview with Inside Edition. She would admit that in the years since 1978, she had tried to take her own life several times to go be with her family, since they pretty much are all dead from taking their own lives. And she would say that she does believe that her father, Charles Emmanuel, whatever you want to call him, is God, and that he will come back and do what he said he was going to do. So then in 2000, she was seen, I guess, like living with Matthias in Spokane, Washington. And Matthias apparently had actually trained several members of the local police department on self-defense, but I guess before they became cops. So then, of course, in that same year, so we're still in 2000, there would be 5 members that would come out and say they claim to be reincarnations of Moses, Abraham, Adam, Eve, and Noah. As you can imagine, they practice white supremacy and are anti-Semitic. And so today that we know of, because the cult isn't really talked about like as much as it was, like, because obviously way more tragic things happened, so this cult is kind of pushed under the rug compared to other cults. And basically in 2005, she would be living with Matthias until she was sent to a care center for adults in Idaho. In 2008, Matthias would send letters to the Mormon church basically saying, hey, look, fire's going to rain down from the sky and kill anyone who is an enemy of ours. And that this random mountain was going to come and like crush the city of Manti, unless you were, of course, a follower of the David family. So then, of course, at least he would not encourage violence, and would even say, like, don't die by suicide, like David and like Emmanuel and his family did. Like, don't go out like they did. And it's actually the last known thing about them was 2008, which I just told you, and it's not even known if they're still together. But those 2 areas, Spokane and Denver, those are the areas they're most likely believed to be practicing, right? And then the hotel where the incident happened at the International Dunes, it was a Shiloh Inn, and then it became a Holiday Express in 2015. Because apparently, remember, like, the reputation, and this is, like, the worst, like, mass murder in Utah up to that point. And so, of course, they're also trying to, like, get rid of the image. So we got to change the hotel names. It's just what we got to do. And also, it said the 11th floor is haunted. And then if you go to the pool, because there's still a pool at this hotel to this day, even though the children were never allowed to go to the pool, apparently you could still, like, hear children playing at the pool. basically, well, now we're dead, so, you know, we can play at the pool if we want, you know. And there are people who even try to stay at the 11th floor, and if possible, even try to stay in the room that Rebecca pushed her children off of, see if they can get anything. And so, yeah, that is the case of the David family cult, a lesser-known cult out of Utah. And so, yeah, very tragic, of course. I obviously think it was all murder, but they're claiming that the older kids voluntarily jumped off. Definitely know what you think. If you have any lesser-known cults that involve a female as a leader, or at least has an active part in someone dying, definitely let me know. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye.
So if I play dead, will you regret everything that you did, that you said? I don't think you understand what you're doing, and my heart's black and blue from the bruising. I feel like when I'm with you I'm losing. I feel like you think that this amusing, sitting there gaslighting and confusing. Was it me? Is it me? Am I deluded? I'm the one who's always sorry, the conclusion. Even though I offer all of the solutions, I wish you loved me like I love you. It's